to Old Soul Podcast. My name is Bria, it's spelled B-R-E-I. Thank you so much. It's been a while since I've done a commentary, and mostly that is because life has been terrible, sucky, and sadly I am not going to be doing a commentary about a movie that will uplift it or change the vibe at all. But I felt really drawn to watch this movie and also talk about it because it felt right, it felt accurate, and so I thought, why not talk about it? It's something that's so relatable. And before I tell you what the movie is, or film, I think that the reason why I'm so drawn to this film and why I really fell in love with this film in the genre of this type of filmmaking that sort of feels like documentary, and then some other facts about the film in that they used real people and not trained actors or actresses. And I don't know how many of the actors within this film were trained or just like, everyday people, if there were, varying levels or degrees of that. But ultimately, this is like one of the OG neo-realism type films, one of the first realistic films I was exposed to when studying film, and one of the films that was just good because it didn't try to be anything but itself. And I think the reason why this film is coined as a classic and it won't ever die out is because the situation that goes on in this film is something that has gone on forever and will continue to happen, sadly. But sometimes people use film as a form of escapism, and sometimes you need to hear music or read stories or watch stories that relate to what you're going through. Maybe you feel less alone, or you feel like, hey, this movie gave me hope because, I saw it through this lens. Whatever the reason, this is one of those films. Although it might not be too hopeful because the ending isn't very hopeful either. But anyway, the film that I'm going to talk about today is called Thieves. And it is, or was, directed by Vittorio de Sica. And it is an Italian film, and it was released in 1948, as it's listed on IMDb. There's no rating listed, it just says not rated, and it has a runtime of 1 hour and 29 minutes. And IMDb summarizes it as, in post-war Italy, a working class man's bicycle is stolen. Endangering his efforts to find work, he and his son set out to find it. It as in the bike. Okay. The film opens with, it was in black and white. I did watch this with subtitles. I do not speak Italian. It is set in Italy. Okay, just so you have an overview. So, from the beginning, we see the main character, Antonio, who is the father of the household, and he looks to be unemployed or in search of work. Both can be a thing at the same time. And it looks like he's probably at some form of an employment agency, whatever that would have been called back then, and in Italy. And there's this guy that comes out. He looks like he's like in charge of, the employment there, and he says, tells Antonio, I have a job for you, but you have to have a bike. Do you have a bike? And he pretty much tells him he doesn't have a bike, but he can get one in a few days. He's like, no, you need a bike and you need it like now, like this starts tomorrow. And he's desperate. He needs a job, he needs money, he needs income. Probably like running on fumes at this point, right? And you can see not only the desperateness or desperation within Antonio, but everyone around him. All these other men around are looking for jobs. As soon as he even seems like he might decline the job or can't deliver with what the head guy of the employment place is asking, all the other guys are jumping on it. I have a bike. I can get a bike. I'll take it. And people are looking for work, clearly, and it's so bad that they're all hanging outside that building, yelling, I'll take it, I'll take it. Eventually Antonio disagrees. He gets his paper, the information of the start date, all that stuff, and he leaves, and he goes home, and he explains the situation to Maria, his wife, and they're kind of frustrated, going back and forth. His bike, as we soon see, has been pawned. They had to pawn it for food at some other time. They needed food, and that's the only way that they could get the food that they needed. So they did have a bike at some point, and it's now at the pawn shop. So Maria goes, and she looks like she's looking through some drawers or something, and she grabs some bed sheets. They look like they're pretty nice bed sheets, blankets, whatever. So she grabs those, and her and Antonio, they go off to the pawn shop. It looks like they do some sort of exchange where they exchange the sheets for the bike, and they're able to get the bike. And we see the scene. I don't know if this was before or after, but Maria goes to, which looks like a psychic, and she sort of takes Antonio with her, and she's really grateful that he's found a job, and they're really happy to finally have a start date. Okay, they got the bike, cool. And you can tell they're in a pretty, tight and serious situation. So she's really grateful. And at some point it seems that she had gone to the psychic, and she was gonna pay her or give thanks. And, you can see Antonio being sort of like, why are we here? What are we doing here? And she's grateful. She goes to thank her. She's like, she said something would happen and this, so I need to thank her, as a sort of a good luck thing. And she seems to respect this lady. And I call her a psychic, although I don't know if that's what she would be called, but that's what it gives, like that energy. And you can tell that Antonio's, a skeptic about that, but it doesn't really matter anymore. They're pretty set. And so cut to a scene of Antonio and his son Bruno, his quite young son Bruno, and it looks like there's a baby on the bed, and Antonio and Bruno are looking over the bike. Bruno kind of says, that scuff wasn't there before. Bruno kind of acts like an adult, even though he's a child. And his father Antonio is starting work, and Bruno is gonna go with him or along the way before he starts work that day. And you see Maria sending them off, happy, calm, whatever. So something I did notice, Antonio drops Bruno off, and I was expecting him to drop him off at like school or something, but no, Bruno gets dropped off at what looks like some sort of serving job. I don't know if it's a gas station or shoe shining. I don't really know what it is, but it doesn't look like a schoolhouse, and it looks like Bruno might actually have a job, and he looks really young, like he should be getting dropped off to go to school type young. So that also makes me think they're in really dire need of money, and their child is working. At least that's what it appears to be, and maybe that was normal back then, especially if you were poor. I know in the olden days, if you were like a farmer and you had kids, your kids were working on the farm, things like that, and it wasn't unusual to have more kids, more hands. But I don't know, I just thought, wow, he's really young, and is it summer? I was wondering all those things. So let me know if I'm wrong about that, or if you have any information about that, because I didn't get it. So after that, Antonio goes his first day of work. He's given like a ladder, And it seems like his other coworker, or the guy who's just training him for that day, sort of explains, you got to put up these posters, make sure they look nice, make sure they are not going to fall off. Basically, those posters look like old Hollywood films. One of those, the main poster that I saw in the film, looks like a picture of Rita Hayworth from Gilda, but I can't say for certain that it's that, but it does look like that sort of type of old-timey, classic Hollywood marketing posters that they were putting up for people to go to the movies, which is very ironic considering that it seems like they were going through the effects of war, inflation, poverty, and then you see this poster like, go to the movies and forget how depressed you are and miserable, which is, like I said earlier, escapism, I guess voyeurism in a lot of ways, but a major juxtaposition, a major comparison on screen without actually saying it. And, so we see him doing that. He's on his ladder and he's trying to fix the poster, and his bike is like propped up against a wall. And this is probably his first or so poster putting up by himself after that other guy kind of watches him and shows him around what to do, just telling him, you got to do it right and you got to be quick, pretty much. And, it's his first day of work, he's in a good mood. And then you see this guy around, a few guys actually, and he's eyeing that bike that belongs to Antonio. And he's really looking at it and looking around, and you see this other guy maybe across the street, he's looking at that guy, and they're kind of looking at each other, and he's by this car, and clearly they're working as a group to steal things, and right now the target is Antonio's bike. His major source of income right now, that bike. And so the guy, it looks like he is making sure that Antonio isn't distracted, which he is because he's on a ladder, like literally trying to do his job. And when they feel like they're ready, they go for the bike, and Antonio turns around and he yells, "Thief, thief," and he's yelling loudly and he's running after him, and this little group of guys does end up getting the bike and getting away, although Antonio does yell and ask for, yell loud, ask for help. I think he at some point even gets in a taxi, or I don't know, gets a ride on a car and, says follow. And anyway, the guy gets away with Antonio's bike. And terrible. So he ends up going to pick up Bruno, but it takes him a lot longer than it would have because that morning Bruno and him rode on the bike. And now he's going back and picking Bruno up after getting on the bus to go pick him up. So it takes a little longer, and Bruno's kind of wondering, like, where's the bike? And the dad explains everything to him and pretty much says, like, we're going to go look for it, so on and so forth. And I don't remember if they look for it all in one day or they look for it a little bit and then they go back. But it all happens pretty quickly. And again, the runtime is about 1 hour and 39 minutes. So the pacing is really good. And I never got bored when I was watching the film, but I am biased because this isn't my first time watching the film and I really enjoy it. So I'm just kind of giving you an idea of like the pacing. It's pretty quick and I can't really remember the specifics on anything, but I think they react rather quickly, and I think that they're, he's desperate. He needs that for work. He literally got his bike stolen in the middle of a shift. The day's practically over. The longer you wait, who knows how much luck you're gonna have with your bike after you're waiting a few days. So it's pretty, a pretty quick reaction. And so they go out with Bruno. It's Antonio and Bruno now. They're going around, asking if anyone's seen a bike. They can't find it. They can't find that guy. Antonio goes to one of his friends and who he trusts, who knows people, knows the town, knows how things work. And, he sort of explains, okay, we'll help you. I think at that point, he might have told Maria. I do remember or recall seeing her in that scene. And so the friend helps out. They go to this market, and Bruno's with them every step of the way. They go to the market, and they can't find the bike, although they're looking. And so this market is sort of like if a bunch of vendors or like street sellers were there and they're all there trying to sell stuff and make money. You can tell that it's pretty desperate night right now because they all need money, trying to get people to buy from them at any means necessary. And they do see a lot of bike parts, but he can't necessarily identify if it's his bike, which is probably what the thieves hope for. You know, they take it and they take it apart, they spray paint it, whatever sort of form of paint they would have used back then. And yeah, so they're looking through that, can't find it. He even like accuses the guy like, hey, let me see this, and the other guy's like, I don't have to let you do anything, blah 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 blah, which is kind of suspicious, but also it's like, I mean, I guess, you know. And the friend sort of like de-escalates that situation. What else happens? They chase this old guy who looked like he was around one of the thieves, who looked familiar to Antonio, that he couldn't catch up to when he saw him again later. They chase this old guy around this church and basically stalking this guy so he can tell him like where that guy lives, so he can figure out where his bike is. Eventually they find the group of people. Essentially it seems like it was a group effort. They find this guy or those guys and they get ganged up on and gaslit and lied to more, and they're like, we didn't take your bike, what are you doing here, get out of here. Like the neighbors around join in, standing up for them, whatever. This ain't their first rodeo, right? So, but it's definitely the guys or that group that took his bike, and he definitely is pretty sure that that's the group, and it does seem as though that is them, but they're lying, and at this point the bike's gone, basically. Bruno's getting worried, so he runs over to his, to a cop, and they get help from the cop, and the cop even like, he diffuses the situation. He even goes into one of the apartments and they look around, there's no bike. And then there's even a time where Antonio goes to that same sidekick where he was making fun of Maria about earlier. And this is interesting to me because I do notice, and I think anyone can kind of understand this or agree, that when people are in a desperate situation or really in need, they sometimes will do things that is out of character for them. So for some people, they'll automatically have an interest in faith in a way that they would not have had before, or they steal, or which will come into play later specifically for this film, or you know, just out of character in forms of desperation and frustration, agitation, all those things. And then at that point the lady doesn't really tell them any new information. That sort of is a dead end. But, you know, it's worth trying at this point. And so they've done all this stuff. And, I mean, even in between looking for the bike, Antonio and Bruno's personal relationship as father and son gets really tense, to the point where Antonio is sort of taking out his frustrations on Bruno, even though Bruno's a child and he's just trying to help out his dad, and he feels bad and scared and nervous, and like all these things are happening. A huge downfall from where the morning took them, where they were excited and eager. Now they're just stressed to the max, to the point where they argue, and Bruno just keeps his distance from his dad, like they're walking further apart. You know, it's really, you're seeing that transition rather quickly with the pace, but it doesn't feel rushed, and it's sad to see on screen. And there's even a moment where he gets worried, like he's looking for Bruno and he can't find him, and then he finds him, and some other kid had like an accident near the water, and he thought it might have been Bruno and it wasn't. But you know, it's one of those things where you get so caught up you forget about the little things and your kid and, you know, things like that. And so Antonio feels bad, and they end up going to a restaurant. And again, all this is not, the way that I'm explaining this isn't all in the same order. I'm just sort of giving you a rundown of what happens within the searching for the bike, and I'm backtracking back to this specific, you know, sequence of scenes between Bruno and Antonio. And they end up at this restaurant, and honestly he probably can't afford to be at that restaurant, but he feels bad toward his son and he kind of wants to lift up his spirits. Maybe he's in a little bit of denial right now, and he doesn't really want to go home with no good news either. And they go in there, there's a band sort of, singing, playing instruments, and they sit at a table, and the film does this thing where they do a straight on comparison of social class from a perspective of Bruno and Antonio sitting at the table, and then this other family who's very clearly has more money and are rich, or some form of more, have more income than Bruno and Antonio's family. And you even see the child look back kind of at Bruno, and maybe he wasn't judging him, but he kind of had a judgy face on, like turning his head and then looking back at his food. They're all eating comfortably, their clothes look really nice, and then you see Antonio and Bruno, they look exhausted, tired, and Antonio is trying to cheer Bruno up, but at the same time he's kind of giving him a life lesson, which parents tend to do when things come around and they explain things to their kids. And he sort of says, do you know how much work I would have to do to be able to afford to eat the way that they are eating? And they're eating the food, and you can kind of see the realization and the understanding, which I'm sure Bruno has had most of his life, but you really see it settling in as they continue eating, and the direct cuts from, I guess it could be considered a parallel, but they're in the same location. It's not like, different locations happening at the same time, but you see like similar to a shot reversal where you see Bruno and Antonio, and then you see the other family, and it's directly making this dialogue or comparison with the camera in those cuts. And it's sad, and it's realistic, and I literally was sad the whole scene. You have this like uplifting music in the back, but all you can think is, God, that sucks. So once they're done eating, they do end up going home without finding the bike. But as they're heading home, you can see that Antonio has all but given up, but he kind of leaves Bruno alone, or tells him to do something. I can't remember what happens, so he can be alone by himself with his thoughts. And he has at that point decided that he can't give up the job that he has, even if he doesn't have a bike, but he does realize that he can't do it on foot. So he tries to go, and he literally attempts to steal someone else's bike, which all I have to say about this is, like, yes, you shouldn't steal, and like you have to take accountability for your actions. Antonio's a grown adult, he knows better, especially as someone who has just had this happen to him. Can you imagine, this family, or this person, this guy, because it was a guy that he stole the bike from, or attempted to steal the bike from, could be going through the same situation as him, right? And so it's one of those things where you become, your own monster, your own nightmare. And it's unfortunate. Now, I do think there needs to be some commentary and dialogue over the fact that, like, poverty and hunger probably would make a lot of people do a lot of things that they would regret or not be proud of. And a lot of people can say whatever they want to say about what they would do, but you never really know until you're in that situation, and that's just a fact. I feel like on one hand, someone stealing food because they're starving doesn't bother me personally or morally. I'm like, I think it's insane that there's a paywall on food, something that you have to survive, right? The things that you have to survive that have paywalls behind them should be criminal, right? It's terrible. But to steal someone else's bike, someone who's just minding their business, taking someone else's property, now that's pretty fucked, right? He's in that way, whether he's indirectly or directly hurting someone, he's hurting someone in another family in the same way that he was affected. It's sort of like this full circle moment, but not in a good way. And he tried to distract Bruno. Again, I don't remember what he did to distract Bruno or get Bruno away at that moment, as they were about to head home, and he had given up in the way that he'd given up trying to find his own bike, not given up on the job or anything. And the guy whose bike he tries to steal, chases after him. But unlike in his situation, a lot of other people jump in to try to help the guy, and they're like chasing Antonio down the street, and they're yelling, and Bruno is seeing all of this. He's seeing his dad in this very terrible situation that he put himself in, right? And he sees like this almost like a swarm of people chasing his father. I'm sure he's processing it, but all he can really think about is, that's my father. His dad's hat falls off when he's running. Bruno, he must have been so scared, and it's so heartbreaking to watch on screen. Bruno picking up his dad's hat and dusting it off, and his glossy eyes, like he's about to cry, has already started, and he's walking toward his dad, and the guys end up catching Antonio, and they're yelling at him, and so on and so forth, and eventually they decide to let him go. And I think a lot of the reason why they do that is because they saw Bruno and they realize that's his kid, and they kind of feel bad for the kid, not so much for Antonio, and they kind of tell him, don't do this again, and they leave, which Antonio should feel very grateful that he didn't have to that they didn't call the cops on his ass. And that's basically how it ends. And this film is one hell of a ride, and I think that I don't necessarily know if I can think about having any favorite scenes. I like it all cohesively in the way that it's laid out for you. I feel like, I'm not a sucker for happy endings, right? Like, I kind of don't seek films for happy endings. I feel like the most realistic ending to this film could have and should have been the way that it ended. He didn't find the bike. He's not going to be able to finish that job. His son saw him in the most vulnerable, terrible situation where adults are usually really good at hiding from their kids. Usually. Kids see a lot of things. And there's no cherry on top of it. You can assume that maybe he found a job. You can assume that if he did, in time, maybe they didn't starve. I mean, so many ways to think about how it ended once they, Bruno and Antonio walked home after that terrible incident and situation. You can imagine how that affected Bruno for the rest of his life, All those things are the sort of ambiguous ending, maybe not so ambiguous, but things that you will think about after leaving the theater, after watching the film, right? And I just think this is one of the films that, if you really like documentaries and you really like films that are realistic, you should watch it. And just know that you're not going to have, lollipops and rainbows as an ending. I do think that it's always great to see the working class and underdogs win in the end, but I think the thing is that realistically, the people that are working the hardest to keep it together, the people that are basically keeping this country, and wherever you live, right, afloat, are the people who are exploited the most, who aren't given any breaks. Not really anyway, even though everyone seems to think that. And when I say everyone, I mean like the 1% that thinks that we're getting some sort of special treatment, when that's never how it is. And, working class or poor, everyone's like a paycheck away from, homelessness, starvation. And that's terrible, and not enough items or things surrounded by you. And the world is going to change that, right? And I think that this film is going to be talked about forever, and it already has been talked about for a long time, because, like I said in the beginning, it is something that has always been an issue and will probably always be an issue with the way we're going in terms of capitalism. So sorry to be such a Debbie Downer for this commentary, but I really did feel like this is a film that I should talk about. And, I love movies, but like I said, I don't always go toward movies that are super happy. And I don't think that you should. I don't think that you should always look for things that are always happy. I think sometimes things are hard and sometimes social commentaries have to be had. You know, these things are real. As much as you try to use every form of escapism to leave and run from those issues, it doesn't always work. So, yeah, and I'm going to just go over a few quotes from the film that I enjoyed, and then I will, end the commentary at that. So, give me a few minutes. Okay. So, there's a quote stated by Antonio, and he says, "There's a cure for everything except death." And then there's another quote by Antonio, and he says, "Why should I kill myself worrying when I'll end up just as dead?" Talk about the truth. Okay, and here's a conversation between Lansantona. I don't remember if this was his friend or if it was the sidekick, but I just liked the conversation, right? And this was Antonio and Santona. And Santona says, "What have they stolen?" And Antonio says, "My bike." Santona says, "What can I say? I can only tell you what I see. Listen, you'll find it straight away or not at all. Understand? You'll find it straight away or not at all. Keep your eyes open." And Antonio says, "Where straight away?" And Santonia says, "How should I know? Go and try to understand what I said. You'll find it straight away or not at all." And I feel like that could mean so many things, right? Like, okay, you're literally saying just enough to get my hopes up and not really give me an answer. And then that can also be, you're going to find it right away or you're not going to find it at all, which is kind of accurate because that's exactly what happened. But also, like, valuable things that are taken, they're quick about distributing it up or, black market stuff. And so you don't find it, right? It can't be traced. It's crazy. Okay, and then another quote between Maria, conversation between Maria and Antonio. Maria says, "You shouldn't have pawned your bike." And Antonio says in response, "And how were you supposed to eat?" Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.